Hello, Phil Croshaw here from Passions, and in this episode we welcome Russell Hayes to the show. Hello and a very warm welcome to this episode of Passions. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Russell Hayes. And rather than me do a hodgepodge version of Russell and his background, I'm gonna welcome Russell and ask Russell to tell you who he is and what he does. Hi Russell, thanks for joining me.
Hi Phil, thanks for having me on. Well, I am currently a motoring author. I write books about motoring history, and my passion has always been cars, and that developed into motoring history, and that developed into writing about them, and now fortunately I'm able to be a full-time motoring author. I don't quite know where the cars thing came from, but if I look back at photographs of when I was very, very small, I'm sitting on my grandma's lap with a Matchbox car in my hand. So something started very, very early on. And I always used to like, joining in with my dad, maintaining his car and washing his cars and going and choosing the next car. We never had a new car, we had a second-hand car. And then I went to university, trying to work out what I wanted to do. And I started writing a little bit about cars for owners' clubs magazines. And then I wrote for the student newspaper, and I really discovered that I really enjoyed the act of writing and telling a story. And I was really fortunate to be able to join a company called Haymarket Publishing, which publishes most of the motoring magazines in Britain in the late 1980s as a graduate. And they put me around different magazines, including Campaign, the advertising magazine. And I learnt my craft from there, but they said, where would you like to go? And I said, well, I'd like to go to Watcar. So I started my writing career at Watcar, and I also did some work in the archives there. They had a huge filing basement full of car pictures which needed filing, and nobody knew which cars were which. So I spent a fantastic summer holiday just rifling through all these old car pictures and trying to sort them out. So that's how I got started. And then I did about 11 years in motoring journalism generally, writing for car magazines. At one point I edited a magazine about vans, and the most exciting thing was I managed to talk myself into working on Top Gear, which was at that time a little half-hour magazine show made in Birmingham, and Jeremy Clarkson was just making his impact then. And I started as a researcher, and I ended up doing some directing and writing scripts and putting together items for it. So that was a fantastic time. About 3 years I did that for. Then came back down to London and worked for a Channel 4 program called Driven, which was their car magazine program. Then went to work for their website. And then I had a change of direction. And I think reflecting on this was the way I truly identified what my passion was and what I really, really wanted to do. I got made redundant from the website. I had about 3 redundancies. You know what publishing is like.
Yeah.
I thought it was a hard time. I wasn't making much money, and the most exciting thing I was doing was going out and a cup of coffee. So I decided to change direction. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do something other than cars. So I applied to join the Government Civil Service press office group, had to do lots of tests, lots of assessment days, and I ended up being a press officer for the Crown Prosecution Service. And then I didn't intend to do it for very long, but I ended up staying in various places, such as the Attorney General's office and the press office for the judges, for 16 years. But all the time in the background, the cars were still there. It was always still the interest hadn't gone away. And I got asked in, I think, 2004 to write a book about Lotus cars by an ex-colleague who was looking for new authors, and it was for Haynes, you know, the publishing company that
Yes,
did
the
the car
books.
magazine. They used to do motoring history books at that time, so they had a need for authors. So I did that first book, and I absolutely loved it. It was that was all in my spare time, evenings, weekends.
Well,
And
what
it
was
was
it about that process then that you think that you really enjoyed? Because it can be quite a, my words, not necessarily yours, but almost a labour of love with books, can't it? It can take quite some time to pull it all together and quite a lot of patience. What was it you enjoyed most about that process?
I think what I enjoyed and what I still do enjoy is bringing all the pieces together. Is the search, is the getting your structure right, seeing how it's going to flow. I mean, fortunately, with motoring history, you normally have a kind of narrative which runs through time, so you have a framework to start off with. Um, but um, but then you do look at what's already on the market. You see what other books have been written, what you could add. What I always try to do original research, what archives I can go to, what papers I can look at which might bring something new, um, and also what pictures I'll need. That's 50% of the work for one of my books is sourcing the images, and often people would buy a motoring book just on the images. So going to archives, just spending entire days without surfacing for light or food or air, rifling through files just to see that rare image that hasn't been seen somewhere else. So that's a huge part of it, and you have to do that in tandem with the writing, and of course you're on a deadline, so you have to know where you want to be at a certain point. So I love the sort of bringing together of all the elements, and seeing what I learned along the way.
So is it fair to say then that it's very handy to have a real serious, deep passion for the subject with all that's involved? I suppose what I'm asking you is if you were going to write a book about submarines, for example, would you have the same dedication required to do that, or was it the fact that it was cars? And I mean, obviously you can tell me a second what books you've written, but was that a key part of keeping going, the motivation, if you like, to keep going?
I think it is, yeah. I mean, I realised that it was a passion when you were doing something you love, and the boundary between work and pleasure has blurred.
Yeah.
So it was never a problem getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do a couple of hours writing before I went to my day job, or coming home in the evening and working till 10, and working at weekends and holidays. So that's how I realised it was a true love. But I think if I did another subject, I would enjoy the challenge, but I'd feel less confident, because I have this background, and I just absorb information about cars as I go along. I'm always got my head in a car magazine or a car program of some kind. And my dad was a pivotal point in that. When I was about 9, I think, he said, "Well, you shouldn't be reading comics anymore," and he thrust a copy of Thoroughbred and Classic Cars magazine into my hand, and that was it. I was off on classic cars.
You were hooked.
Yeah, so I do, I do have the confidence of that sort of background knowledge, and to know what's there, and if it's gone to the back of my head, I can bring it forward and think, okay, I remember I had something to do with that 10 years ago. And you develop your own back catalogue.
So it's interesting that. So how many books have you produced to date then? And just give us a flavour of the sorts of books you've been producing, you've been writing.
7 to date, and I'm working on 2 simultaneously at the moment. I'm happy to say that most of them have been commissioned from publishers, but some of them have been my ideas, where I thought there was a gap in the market, and I thought there was something that would sell, and I pitched it to publishers. So quickly in order. It's been quite an eclectic selection, which is what I've really liked. I really like hopping from subject to subject, hopping from a really expensive sports car to something everybody owned. So I did a history of Lotus, a history of TVR, and then a history of the Ford Cortina, which I absolutely loved. And then I did a history of the Volkswagen Golf, which is I've just updated, is going to be reprinted. And then one project which was a particular passion of mine was a history of the Earls Court Motor Show, because that building, and that iconic building in London, was just about to be knocked down. Nobody was really recording it, and I thought I'd get in there while there was a chance to record something that was just about to pass. And I got access to the archives of the construction of the building and the various shows that were put on there, and that was the first time those pictures had ever been seen in a book. So I was really quite proud of that book.
So do you get attracted? Do you get attracted then to more of the classic, more of the history? That's the impression I get. It's more about the history of these things as opposed to the very latest Lamborghini, or is it a mixture?
It's more towards the history. It's more towards recording what's past and what may be being forgotten in a sort of collective memory, and also kind of social history. What those cars represented to different people at different times in different countries, and how we thought about cars at a certain point, and how things moved on, how designs moved on. I do tend towards the history side of things.
And you've obviously seen, as we've all seen, some huge developments and changes in publishing in particular, and media, I guess, over the last 10 years, never mind over the last 20 or 30 years. Have you had to adapt to a point to be able to make the most of or take advantage of the way that media and publishing has changed?
That's an interesting question, because there was a point where they thought that motoring history books would really be dying out with electronic publishing, but they are primarily picture driven, and the publishers of history books have found out that people actually like to hold something in their hands. They still like to have a picture book which they can put on the coffee table and sit and enjoy as an object. So that's been quite fortunate. I've not had to go to electronic publishing yet, but that's something I'm certainly open for. And in terms of technology, a lot of photographic archives have digitalized their pictures now. So it's been very lucky in this lockdown. I haven't been able to go to any physical archives, but I've been able to do massive amount of online research for the photography that I'm using in my latest books. And they'll let you can download a reference shot, and then when it comes to the final publication, all the bills are paid and totted up, and the copyrights are cleared. So that's helped in a great way.
Brilliant. Okay, so have you got any other books? You say you've got a couple more projects. Do you think you'll keep writing books now? Is it just part of your DNA, shall we say?
Well, I really hope so. But you're always as good as your last book. So you have to make everyone as good as it can be, so that you keep going. So unfortunately, I've got an American publisher at the moment. I'm on their second book for them, and a British publisher who I'm doing a book for on Aston Martin's. So hopefully that'll lead on to other things. But your back catalogue becomes very important as to your references.
That's interesting. Actually, it's an interesting point you make about the global interest in the cars and the history of the cars. Are there particular countries that are really quite interested and passionate about the history of classic cars and classic cars in general? Particularly, I'm thinking, maybe the Americans' interest in British cars, for example, or vice versa. I guess it's a very global thing, is it?
Oh yeah, it goes both ways, and there's certainly American readers, I think, are quite interested in British cars because there was a fascination with British cars in the 1950s there, the old MVs that really made their mark. And likewise for British readers. I've just had a book come out on the Volkswagen Beetle and the camper van. And of course, that was they were such global cars that the Beetle was almost more of a hit in America than it was in Germany. It had this other life in Mexico where it was being produced. So there is this interchange of interest in other countries. And I'm trying to write for an American audience, but at the same time bringing stuff back from American cars, which British viewers might not have been familiar with, to interest them. And you've got other things like the Japanese market, very interested in things like minis for a long time. So there are these little pockets of very specialized interest all across the world.
And which countries would you say have been most successful in the car world? I mean, obviously the UK's got quite a history, and America's quite well known. Are there any countries that have been maybe quite successful in the car world that people might not be generally aware of?
That's interesting. I mean, I think obviously, Japan and Germany are two prime examples, but perhaps South Korea, if you consider the growth of their car industry and the sophistication of the products from people like Hyundai, is phenomenal now. And they built that industry from scratch from just the late 1960s. Hyundai started by assembling Ford Cortinas. So they came from very humble beginnings and built this huge, sophisticated car industry, adapting very quickly to the market, so improving their cars constantly. So I think South Korea deserves its reputation as a very big global player now.
Brilliant. Okay, so just moving on now, just to something you talked about a few minutes ago, and you were talking about whilst you were working in a full-time job and you were writing the books and producing things on the side. One of the things that's coming up a lot when we talk to people about passions and as part of this research and investigation project is the opportunity that people don't always realize in the internet age to be able to do a day job, but also then do a side hustle at the same time. And that can be a side hustle as a money-making thing. It could be anything from, if you're particularly into, I don't know, babies, you might sell baby clothes, for example, and on everything in between. Is that something that you're familiar with, in terms of that side hustle? Have you ever actually been able to monetize things that you've done on the side, or was it all very much about a hobby?
I always got paid for the books, I'm glad to say. So there was a gain from it. I mean, a lot of people do, especially in the sort of motoring history books, they do write them for the love of them. But I'm able to write them both for the love of them and fortunately get paid for it. There's other things I've done. I mean, for example, when Haynes decided they weren't going to publish motoring history books anymore, they offered all the authors their back supply of stuff they'd already printed, and I couldn't face the idea of my books being sent to a pulp or a discount bookseller. So I ended up with a storage unit with hundreds and hundreds of boxes of my own books for quite a few years. So which I sold at classic car shows. I sat behind a trestle table for hours on end for a number of years. And I also opened up an Amazon shop. I mean, that's something I could recommend. That's quite easy to do if you want to sell on Amazon, and also you can sell on eBay as well. So yeah, you're right. There are these facilities for making a little something along the side, certainly.
Yeah, and then of course, I suppose depending upon what you're doing, there's always that possibility that you can slowly but surely shift away from the day job, and the side hustle becomes more and more the main part of the way that one earns the living, and that obviously depends on what you're doing and how you're doing it. But I think the message is, and this is something that's coming up a lot in these interviews, and from my own experiences, in a sense, is get started. Really, don't try and assume that you're going to be, I don't know, Richard Branson a week on Tuesday, but just get started, and especially if it's a passion, then you'll just enjoy it anyway.
I mean, with writing now, if you think you want to write, you can. You can publish yourself. You can publish your own blogs. You can put stuff out there without needing a publisher, which is the beauty of the current times we're living in. And you can get feedback. So you can put things out there without spending money. You can set up your own blog. You can do a little bit of self-publishing via Amazon, and you can get an idea without expending too much money yourself. All you need is your time. So that's one of the great advantages of the internet age at the moment. I found that the day job paid very well. It was hard work. It was quite stressful. Extremely stressful at times when you called in the middle, and you were called in the middle of the night in the night by a newspaper story. But there came a point where I was offered 2 books at the same time, and I thought, well, something's going to have to give, and it was the day job. So that point can come, but it can take a long time to get there. I did that for 16 years before I felt I could go full time, and I had a sort of foundation behind me. So I would say use the day job as the foundation, and to build up your reserves. Keep plugging away in your spare time with your passion, and then you'll know when the moment is right to give it a go, to swim out to sea.
I think that's great advice and great inspiration. So who knows, somebody right now might be listening to this or watching this, and they might go out and do exactly that, and it could take their life in a completely different direction, which is always good, isn't it? If it's especially if you're not overly happy in your work. Do you sometimes when I think about passions, and I've talked about people about passions, it's almost like one gets I think I'd describe it as almost like a childlike excitement still from being involved in or being around the things that you're passionate about. Is that something that you can relate to? Do you still get a little bit of a childlike excitement if you get near one of these amazing cars that you obviously write about and love so much?
Yeah, I can get quite absorbed, and certainly if I'm working on a particular subject and getting very into it, I find myself dreaming about it. I think it's always a good sign that you're completely into something when your cup of tea goes cold next to you, or you actually forget you haven't had any lunch. You know you're really enjoying what you're doing when that happens.
Okay, well, I've got to ask you, put you on the spot. Top 3 cars, best cars ever made from your personal perspective. And I know I've thrown you right in the deep end with that one.
Yeah. Well, that's a big old list.
So see if you can just come up. What would come to mind? It doesn't have to be the top 3, but 2-3 cars that wow factor cars in your perspective.
Wow factor. An original Lotus Esprit from the mid 1970s. The first James Bond film I saw was A Spy Who Loved Me. White Lotus Esprit, the submarine car. Yeah, that was it. So, that was just a beautiful design. It was an Italian designed car. I still think it looked sensational. So Lotus Esprit, that's in my garage. Got a 1960s Ford Mustang because of that sort of slice of American, optimism and excitement it represented. And I think an original Mini, which was my first car. So because it's such an influential design and such an important car. So it's my top 3, I think.
Brilliant. Quite an eclectic mix, which is good. I think that whole variety thing again going there. Yeah.
I'm not
Okay.
all
So,
sports cars, no.
sorry, say again.
I'm not all sports cars by any means.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I suppose that just goes to show you that passion is wide and varied. Okay, so how can people get hold of your books? Is it the A word again? You know, Amazon. How can people find out more about you and get access to your books?
Yes, it is. It is the A word, but they're available from lots of other online retailers as well, as such as Waterstones, for example. And my latest book is quite widely sold across lots of different internet retailers. Sadly, they're not very often in bookshops. Now and again, they're physically stocked, but largely book sales of my kind of book are on the internet.
Yeah, well, I guess that makes sense. I'm still, to be honest, as a slight aside, I'm still quite amazed actually that companies like Waterstones they do seem to survive. I'm never quite sure how, but there's obviously enough of an interest, I guess, for physical books. But I know that a few people I know have said that they actually enjoy a physical book even more now, perhaps maybe slightly more senior in years, but it's almost like they go back. It takes them back to a time when they got excited about going getting a physical book.
I think that I think I heard that second-hand books are really doing well. That charity shops actually do really good trade in second-hand books, because actually people like something to take on the beach. It doesn't matter if they drop it in the water or get sand on it, and they can recycle it at the end. So it's nice to see there's this churn of interest in older books, which is going on, certainly in novels.
I certainly think remember back to my days when I was a youngster and I used to go and get a new physical album, LP, I think we called them back in the day, didn't we? And the excitement around going to get an LP was, I just think the youngsters really miss out on that. I'm sounding really old now, aren't I?
Vinyl's making a comeback, I understand.
I think it's probably the nostalgia, actually. I suspect it's a lot of it's in that nostalgia. And I think passions and nostalgia connect really, really well. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining me today, Russell. That's really, really interesting stuff. And obviously all the very best with your books. I know, actually, because when I was looking, I know you've actually got a page on Amazon, haven't you? Your own page on Amazon, author page on Amazon. Yeah. So that's fantastic. Thanks for your time, because I'm very appreciative of people's time, because I know it's valuable and I know it's precious. And thanks very much for joining me. And I'm sure I'll catch you again soon on Passions. Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thank you.